through the hymn is say okay, can now have other agent from the American people, Matthew would visit to our park. Say his boss very interesting you the sculpture because you sculpture all about human rights, freedom, democracy. So say with him to visit my park, say many sculpture. They think by this sculpture to New York, very important museum to exhibition. I think this is a very good chance. Also, our team, my team is very happy. Say great is have American people interested in our artwork, So he make a contract with us, then say, okay, my boss is very interested in you how to make the statue for CCP violence. So in the agreement, they make, say we should make a video and the camera in your studio. And I say, okay, because people maybe know how to printing, but don't know how to make sculpture. So I accepted this deal. And so the Matthew come with me. I don't know, he's a spy with Chinese government. Because when he's coming in the Las Vegas, the FBI was warning me, say the Chinese government interested in you, you should be careful. I know because this sculpture is CCP violence. The different Chinese mean. Chinese say this virus coming from American soldier. I say this come from China, Wuhan. It's CCP virus. So different opinion. In the American, this freelance, everybody, I can say, this virus from Biden or from Trump, no any problem. But I say this from China, CCP, this is big trouble, I know. They will be care about me. But I don't know, Matthew is a spy, this is after the Justice Department is a news release, talk to everyone, the journalist, media. After as the last one, I know who is a spy because they are interview me. Say, hi, Chin, do you know as American FBI catch them? I said, who is the spy? Who's burned my sculpture? They say, you don't know? I said, I don't know. They say, this is the art agent Matthew, and they are organized. And Liu Fan and someone in the China, they organized this big trouble for me.
It was a surprise to you. So you kind of expected some of the person to be a Chinese, right, a spy,
Yeah.
and then it turned out to be a white.
Yes.
The documentary is very much about the people who are persecuted by the Chinese government from, the Chinese Han people from the mainland. But of course, the CCP's long arm repression is definitely just not, on the people who originally from the mainland. It's also against the people who from Hong Kong, from Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, the Tibetans. So here we have two representatives of the Hong Kong community and the Tibetan communities, Joey and Pema. Do you want to speak about your own experience being the target of transnational repression by the Chinese government?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can start. Thanks again for, coming in such a cold day to take time to learn about our causes. So my name is Joey. I am a Hong Kong activist now based in Washington, D.C. I started as a student activist back in 2019 when Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement began. I organized a lot of underground protests, etc. And because of that mounting political pressure under Hong Kong's newly implemented national security law, I had to flee Hong Kong in late 2020 and settle down in Washington, D.C. Last year on December 13, the Hong Kong government, for my activism in Washington, D.C., issued a 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on me alongside with the international arrest warrant. And just a few weeks ago, on December 23rd, Christmas Eve, they revoked my Hong Kong Special Administrative Region passport. And unfortunately, my case is not a singular one. And when you look at the Hong Kong community, the Tibetan community, and the Uyghur community here in the US and in other democracy, my case is really just tip of the iceberg of what is happening, what our community members is going on under the CCP's expanding transnational repression scheme happening in the US on American soil and elsewhere. Beyond this deterrent tactic, by issuing a bounty on me and issuing passports, our community members have long suffered from, various kinds of TNR tactics we call, whether it is online harassment and defamation campaigns, that could be, in-person intimidation during counter protests and in many, many forms. And a lot of them are, gender-based against, specifically younger women activists like myself as well. Last year when Xi Jinping came to the US to attend the APEC summit, a lot of in-person attacks have also, happened to our Tibetan activists and Hong Kong activists who are on the ground. And Pema was there as well, so I'll leave it for her to detail. But yeah, we just want to, through my story and through, Pema's personal experience, just to showcase this, ongoing, expanding scheme of what is happening in the U.S.
Thank you, Joey, and thank you, Yi-chan, for hosting this very important space. So, as Yacha mentioned, my name is Pema, and I'm a Tibetan daughter of refugees as well as an activist for human rights. And for me, as well as so many other Tibetans and Uyghur people, this term of transnational repression is something that existed in our lives before it existed in a dictionary. Because I remember being a small kid growing up in Nepal, one of the countries that's most closely linked to China's long arm. It has a very strong presence by the CCP there. And the interesting thing is when you look at what types of transnational repression they were putting onto Tibetans in the Tibetan community there were things that people heard about, like not giving access to documentation. Tibetans that escaped from Tibet along the time when my father did, they still don't have documentation. Their kids are still stateless till today because of pressure by the Chinese government. Refugees are turned away at the border, even violating international treaties because of the Chinese government's pressure. But what I actually experienced, which most sort of influenced my understanding of transnational repression, was being 10 or 11 years old. I was wearing a shirt just like this one, and it was Tibetan New Year's, and I went to Bodhanath, one of the most auspicious stupas in the entire world. It's a day of celebration for the Tibetan people, but I remember everybody was scattered and separated, and there was military with guns that were as tall as I was, perhaps, and they were marching. They weren't talking to us. They weren't pushing us around. They were just occupying that space to let us know that we should try to keep our joy, our identity, a little bit contained. And I've still thought about that experience many times till now, and what I've come to realize is that what the Chinese government fears the most is for us to embrace our identities as one that doesn't belong within the CCP's narrative. And they fear that when we embrace that identity, the world will see the reality of their colonial practices, of their oppression, and the world will see that the source of power for the Chinese government is the silencing and oppression of Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and Chinese people. And once that reality comes to light, once that narrative becomes accepted by global communities, that will be a very threatening aspect to the Chinese government's regime. It will destabilize the very nature of that regime. So although we see these cases of transnational repression like the ones that we saw in the film, it may seem like they're upset about a specific exhibition, or they're opposed to one person's specific issue or campaign that they're lobbying for. The wider issue of transnational repression, it really actually targets the right of people who don't confine within the CCP's model identity. And it wants to actually limit us not only within the borders of the Chinese government's China and its occupied territories, but it actually wants to take that model of repression and spread it around the whole world, such that no other identity may exist anywhere in the world. And that's something which not only hurts Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Chinese people, but it actually hurts everybody in the world. It creates this idea that the Chinese identity is a monolith, and there's only one Chinese identity, and that's one which loves Xi Jinping and thinks just like him and wishes for the Chinese government to rule in that way. So for me, that's just a little bit about my experience with transnational repression and why I think this film is more crucial now than ever to really influence and shape that discussion and allow the voices of people affected by the issues to speak directly with the audience.
Thank you. Yi, you're the director of the documentary. You also grew up in China. So what inspired you to make the film? This is the first question. Second, after you made the film, do you fear that yourself become the hero of the movie you make? Kind of a meta situation. Like, do you fear you become the target of transnational repression?
Yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. I was really inspired by the 1989 democracy movement because it's a topic that's banned in China. So being someone who was born and grew up there, I knew nothing about it until I moved here. So I was really inspired by what the movement everyone did back then, and I was also really I didn't also know that dissidents like Wang Juntao, who continued his activism and his work even in exile. He never really stopped doing that. I felt like it's a story that has almost been forgotten. But at the same time, it's so important and relevant, especially when I started filming in 2019, what has been going on in Hong Kong, and just seeing everything being so interconnected. I really wanted to tell the story of the dissidents who have been continuing the work for a very long time. Actually, yeah, throughout the making of the film, I was aware of the consequences because outside the embassy, I knew that there were surveillance cameras, and I encountered a lot of intimidations. Honestly, at the time, I didn't even know if the film would get made. Not just because of the intimidation, the violence that was going on, because I think what Pema said really resonated with me, because as a filmmaker, I experienced for the first time, firsthand, Chinese government's influence in shaping narrative, and especially in the filmmaking industry, I got a lot of pushback, and it was really hard to find support for the film. So I had very limited resources, and I didn't know if the film would ever get made. It was really the foundations that supported the film. So that was a very interesting experience for me as well. But Wei Ming and Joey and Pema, their work really inspired me. And I feel like this film is bigger than myself, and it's a really important story that I think deserves to be seen with no fear.
Thank you. The reason that, as we saw in the documentary, that FBI made the investigation, DOJ had published the indictments, Matthew actually pleaded guilty, was because the community who experienced the transnational repression, made the government aware of this. Otherwise, they didn't know this was happening. First, we made them, I would say, as part of this China pro-democracy movement, we made the U.S. government aware of the issue. We gave them advice on how to address the issue. We mobilized resources so they will spend the money. They will invest the personnel to do the investigation. That's why, we are seeing the results. Joey and Pema were also, part of the movement. They both work for advocacy organizations. Could you to talk about, the kind of work you have done, the interaction you had with, government officials, whether it's at the federal level or the local police level, and the research and advocacy work? Pema, do you want to start?
Yes, as Joey mentioned previously, Students for a Free Tibet was one of the organizing groups when Xi Jinping visited the United States, both his previous state visit as well as the recent one in 2023. And I think in terms of that experience, what we saw was that the Chinese government really truly is in this position where they need domestically to have that narrative control. And they need domestically for all the people within China to believe in what Xi Jinping is saying. And so that poses this extreme risk where they have activists living in democratic nations speaking out and actually sharing information about the colonial boarding school program inside Tibet, where over 1 million students are being now effectively raised by the Chinese government, and Tibetan language schools are being shut down. A boarding school system that, the world has seen before, and we know how that ended, and yet the Chinese government is doing it again, and they want those things to be done silently under the cover of propaganda and this media black hole inside Tibet. But when we see on the ground in San Francisco, in terms of policy and government reaction to transnational repression, what we saw was that the government, even the US government, which is one of the governments which speaks as though transnational repression is one of its top priorities, it wasn't really prepared to handle the magnitude of what happened, the level of sophisticated organization by the Chinese government and its United Front groups. What I experienced one of the nights when we had our protest against Xi Jinping, one of my colleagues, she's actually here, Tela Zoksang, did an action against Xi Jinping. He was inside the hotel having a meeting with US business leaders, and she did a protest outside, and we were there. There were initially about over 500 Tibetan Uyghurs and Hong Kongers protesting. As the situation got more and more dangerous, Tibetans and Hong Kongers and Uyghurs were being approached and confronted by CCP supporters violently and aggressively. Many of them had to go home. Eventually, there were students who were physically assaulted and beaten. And there was a moment where I was standing, it was raining, and I was standing with some parents, and they were begging me, my 16-year-old children are here at this protest. I am so worried about them. Please, can you as the director of SFT tell them to go home? I'm so worried. They're adamant that they will not leave, because as long as Xi Jinping is on democratic soil, they will continue protesting. And these are 16-year-old Tibetans. They've never stepped foot in a free Tibet, but they believe in this vision so sincerely that they continue fighting. And I think what that really meant to me is that governments like the US government and so many democratic countries around the world have a responsibility to protect those people, to be able to share their voices. Because as an activist, it's not my duty to tell a 16-year-old not to raise their voice. That's the last thing. I don't wake up in the morning to tell people that. So what we did was, we were able to find solutions within our community to keep ourselves safe. We had to create systems where people weren't alone, even what we first started was a buddy system with 2 people, but we found even that was too dangerous because people were being confronted by groups of 10, 15, 20 middle-aged men with weapons, and they were organized, and they were even colluding with the local Chinese consulates and embassies, as reported by the Washington Post expose, which we were able to liaise on. So all of these things, hopefully you guys can read more about them online, but the main kind of takeaway was that although governments are speaking about this issue more, which is important, they haven't really come up with actual solutions on how to keep protesters and those that are speaking out truly safe on democratic soils like in the United States.
Yeah, I will just echo what Pema said. A lot of the responsibility right now in terms of countering transnational repression on American soil falls on the shoulders of people from our own communities who are the very victims fighting on the front lines to counter this issue. Back in 2019, during the peak of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement, my partner, he used to be an organizer in Boston at the time, organized massive pro-democracy solidarity protests for Hong Kong. And what he encountered was that there are tens of thousands, counter-protesters who are coordinated, organized by Chinese embassies locally, associations supported by the Chinese embassy to violently confront the protesters who are standing in solidarity with Hong Kong. Obviously, in America or in any democracies, I do believe that everyone should be free to express their opinions peacefully, and that includes, pro-Beijing protesters who are here to support the Chinese Communist regime. However, when it turns violent, when the counter-protesters were following him and his fellow organizers back home, having their addresses, having their church addresses, their telephone number, their schools and everything circulated among WeChat groups, there were nothing that the local police could do or have done to protect them. And that happened in 2019. And, fast forward to 2023, when the Hong Kong government issued a bounty on me as a US citizen, the only thing that I could do was to reach out to the FBI and then to document this incident and then the death threats that was being sent to me and my fellow Hong Kong activists who also got a bounty placed on their heads. But there was no concrete action that was coming out from any law enforcement agencies from the US. And if you look at our legislations right now, currently in the US, there is no legislation that is, designed specifically to counter China or Kremlin's transnational repression against pro-democracy activists and dissidents here. The only time that they would get, convicted or as Wang Junpao or as Wang Shujun in the documentary, convicted by the jury was when the time, they actually did physical harm and actual, espionage activities on the Chinese Communist government. But we know that when you talk about TNR, that is not the only tactic that the CCP has been deploying, and we don't have any mechanism available to, effectively address these issues that are, threatening our communities on a daily basis. There was the Transnational Policy Act, which was introduced by Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon, during the 118th Congress. Unfortunately, that did not go anywhere. And obviously, our communities are going to push hard for it to be adopted in this Congress. However, whether or not this is going to remain a priority for the administration, for law enforcement, whether, mechanisms that are being introduced and proposed are going to be enacted effectively, that remains another question.
Both Pema and Joey were mentioning the point. I think it's very important that the awareness is there. There's some actions, but there's not enough, and there haven't been effective solutions. But women, I feel like you're more, happy that they got the guy, Matthew. I didn't know he was the spy. How do you feel about it? Do you think the government should do more? Are you happy with what the end result?
Yes, I'm happy the American government now is a little bit wake up, but not enough. This movie documentary is very important, powerful for wake up, teach and education American people how Chinese government infiltration in this free soil. Because in my park, they can burn down the sculpture, this art piece. They can burn down the free speech. So I just heard about they talk about Tibet and Hong Kong and the Uyghur, because so many Chinese spy here. Also, you're very interested in the movie. Have another guy is a volunteer for us. She's movie this don't know this guy is spy in our park, but he's a volunteer.
It's the guy who is installing at night. He's fixing the solar panel or the So he's also he turned out to be working for the Chinese government.
Yeah, this is a different line. One line is from Matthew and Liu Fan. They are organized with Chinese government security department. And this guy, Chen Lei, is 线人. What's mean? 线人. Informant. Yeah. And he's working with me and around more than half years. So they know who's help me, who's important, That's very dangerous for my volunteer. My volunteer, their family in China, they get a warning. They can't help Chen because if you help Chen, your father, mother, maybe the account like bank account, maybe court, Yeah.
Yeah, I think one big, factor of a way of carrying out transnational repression is not necessarily, harassing or intimidating people here. Is to harassing, intimidating, or even jailing the family members of the dissidents here. This is extremely effective, right? A lot of dissidents I talk to, they feel, I'm going to sacrifice for the cause, right? I am ready, but I cannot sacrifice my family. And, this is the thing that holds them, that they feel they can't fully participate in the movement. It's not about the danger they face. It's about, they can't allow themselves to sacrifice their own family members. So I think, it's very interesting to hear that, one of your volunteer turned out to be an informant and all that. I'm sure that, within the Hong Kong community, Tibetan community as well, like you wonder whether this person who came to me is actually with me for the cause, or he might be, sent by the CCP to be an informant. This is like how do you navigate that kind of situation? Like, does that affect you psychologically? You run an organization, right? There's volunteer, I want an internship. But how do you deal with this situation?
We accept a highly overqualified internship. Gotcha.
I will apply. Thank you. Okay.
I think that's actually a question that I've personally grappled with a lot, especially because every time we get to work with young people who are from Tibet, for example, that's like a moment that is so special where we get to bring them into the work that we're doing. But it's also a reality that might also leave us vulnerable to individuals who have been interacting with the Chinese government against their will, but at the same time, there has been more interaction than a Tibetan who might have been born and raised outside. So for me, for a long time, this was something that kind of concerned me, is that how do we create a movement that unites all Tibetan young people, those that were born in Western countries, those that grew up in Asia, and those that grew up inside Tibet maybe. And I think one thing that has really come to the conclusion is that we should just operate as though we should just allow and be welcoming into our space for all those who make themselves present to join our movement. But in order to be able to do that, we have to make sure to maintain the utmost level of both digital and also physical security hygiene. And that means, like, for example, keeping secure topics on a very need-to-know basis and not finding it to be a matter of personal offense. That if me and Yachu are discussing something very pertinent to a research topic, even though we are very good friends with Joey, we may not share. And that's not just because we want to be very exclusive or very, hierarchical or anything like that, but because by limiting the information only to channels where people need to know in order to get a specific task done, we're basically eliminating the factor of who do we trust and who do we not trust, and not bringing that into the discussion about whether someone should be given a relationship with a movement or not. And that way, even somebody who's very well-meaning could also be hacked if they have poor digital hygiene. Or even if they have very good digital hygiene, they may still become the victim of cyber hacking. So in the sense that as vulnerable as we are to informants, as long as we maintain a strict nature of need-to-know communication, we're able to protect as much as we can and not allow that protection to get in the way of our movement building. Because at the end of the day, we're not just trying to execute one project or one meeting, we're trying to build a movement, and that requires us to accept hundreds of thousands, and eventually millions of people fighting in hand in our nonviolent fight together. So if we're already being overly limiting on who may join and who may not join, that would actually inevitably prevent us from being able to accomplish our utmost goal at the end.
Joey, how about you? I mean, you have 1 million Hong Kong dollar on your head right now. And, do you sometimes feel, I send you a message, is she a spy? Right? Like, how do you navigate this? Like, trying to, keep this work going at the same time, the digital hygiene stuff or trusting people. Like, do I trust or not trust? Just managing the situation, knowing, there's this most powerful authoritarian government is trying to get you.
I think obviously from an organizational operation standpoint, everything that Pema have said, but to be very honest, I don't have a black and white guideline that me myself use or our community use, because everything, all of this transnational repression, the national security law, the extraterritorial effect of Article 23 that was just implemented in Hong Kong less than a year ago, everything is so new to our Hong Kong diaspora community. And with the bounty, with, when you get messages every day, knowing that people are out there to get you, trying to find out where you live, where you go to school, where you go to church, your company information, and send it back to the Hong Kong government, it could be very, very difficult to understand, what are the relationships that I can rely on, that I can trust, who are the people that we can share information with and include them to be a core part of our movement. But I think, obviously beyond what Pema just mentioned about being inclusive while ensuring the security and safety of our community members, me personally, I do think, better be safe than sorry. I understand that, even for me myself as a wanted activist by the Hong Kong government, state-backed cybersecurity attacks don't happen to me on a day-to-day basis. The CCP sending people to follow me, that doesn't happen on a daily basis. But still, you need to understand that, when you talk about safety and security, it's often not just a safety and security of yourself, but that also people who are actively working with you on your team, community members who come to your protests, demonstrations, who join the online group chats that you have created to be part of this movement. So what I personally observe is that, I just have my VPN on all the time. I make sure I don't go to, places where I can't guarantee my personal safety. I make sure that when, say for example, when you take a photo where there could be community members in the background, you make sure to ask for their consent before you post on your, social media platforms. And I think that is not just a practice applicable to our movement, but then also, for a lot of movements happening here locally on the US and elsewhere in other contexts as well.
You're making the film, you're definitely subjecting yourself to more danger. I'm sure that when you're in front of the embassy, there are people who are watching you. So, what do you want this documentary to achieve? Like, what kind of impact do you want to see, and whether you're seeing it?
So this is our first impact campaign, and I really want to thank all the foundations who supported the film and Human Rights Foundation for supporting our impact screenings. Our goal is to hope that this film will raise more awareness and deepen public understanding, and also build cross-movement solidarity. So we are planning more similar screenings like this one throughout this year. I really want to work with organizations and bring this film to your community and your institution. I think in terms of the impact, we've been doing festival screenings, and we've had many sold out screenings. So I'm very encouraged to see that there's definitely an audience for this film. And also the issues related to this film have been, it's also very relevant with Shu Junwang's case, and also I'm sure you probably all aware of former New York Governor aide Linda Sun's case. So Matthew Zivera's pled guilty, but Frank Liu's case is still on trial. And actually, New York Times recently did an investigation on Zhang Chen. I don't know if you guys remember. He's the one who organized the attack in New York. Yeah. He also organized the attack in San Francisco as well. So Wang Juntao's group was also in San Francisco, and they were attacked, and was a much larger scale. And New York Times did a really great piece on him and his connection to the Chinese government, and how he's also influenced state election in New York as well. So I think with these issues are getting more attention in media, this film I feel is really relevant this year, and we really hope to do more impact screenings, and we are also going to have a DC festival premiere later this month.
So, I mean, we all want more impact. We want the U.S. government to do more to address the issue. As Joey just mentioned, that the bill, Transnational Policy Act, sponsored by Senator Merkley, was going nowhere, and with all the change, he's in the Democratic Party, and with all the changes in Washington, we all saw in the news, right? It's just overwhelming. What kind of specific things you want the new government to do, and what's your expectation? How do you navigate, the political situation within the United States? Anyone who wants to speak?
I have a laundry list of things that I want to say. I need time myself. I think I would just, among the 100 things that I wanted them to do, I think there are two most pressing issues. We understand, how the Republican Party, especially the administration, want to completely implement a complete overhaul of the immigration here in the United States, and that includes mass deportation of illegal undocumented immigrants. And as some of you might know, a lot of the press communities, including the Venezuelans, Cubans, Syrians, Ukrainians, and also including Hong Kongers. There are currently over 3,000 Hong Kongers here staying in the U.S. under this temporary policy called the Deferred Departure Policy, which could be revoked by the Homeland Security Department at any time. President Biden, a few days before leaving office, extended that to February 2027. However, we're not sure yet with the cancellation of the temporary protected status for Venezuelans just a few days ago before we speak here at the panel. We don't know if that is going to, if that is signaling a blanket cancellation of both TPS and DED policy for all the protected people from oppressed communities here in the U.S. If that is the case, if that happens, these 3,000 something Hong Kongers would have nowhere else to go but then to be deported back to Hong Kong, where they could face, lengthy imprisonments for their participation in pro-democracy, solidarity protests here in the United States. So I think the most pressing, demand that our community have been advocating for is for a legal status to be granted to not just Hong Kongers, but then everyone who are fleeing authoritarian countries seeking a safe haven here in the United States. When we talk about ourselves, about the United States being a world leader, about being, a champion of human rights and democracy, it can't just be words. It needs to come with concrete actions, and that would include giving, a more permanent residency status to all of these people from these communities. And then the second thing that I want to talk about is also, some of you might have saw from the news, from the long list of executive orders that was being signed by Donald Trump on the first day of his second term. That includes also a freeze on foreign aid. For so many decades, the foreign aid coming from the State Department and other USG agencies have been supporting diaspora organizations from the Hong Kong community, from the East Turkestan Uyghur community, from the Tibetan communities, and so many other, organizations fighting for human rights and democracy back home, delivering the much needed support that our people would need to sustain the fight on the ground to counter the Chinese Communist Party's crackdowns on the ground on our democratic freedoms. And it is so important that we urge the Trump administration to end this freeze, or else we would not be able to support our partners who are doing this very, very important work on the ground. A lot of the folks, a lot of the implementers in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere have been, urging for actions, including contacting your own representatives and senators, especially on the Republican end, to urge them to write to Secretary of State, now Marco Rubio, and then the other, relevant government officials to urge them to end this freeze so that we can get this much needed delivery of assistance to the hands of people who are actually now fighting on the grounds, on the front lines of countering this authoritarianism. So I would just lay those, two demands right there.
I echo everything that Joey mentioned, especially about the legal status for those fleeing from authoritarian regimes. So many of our Hong Konger friends, every day, it's a reality that they have to face. The wrong paper being shuffled the wrong way by a politician sitting in a building somewhere else miles away could affect the safety of their just existence on a daily basis. And two other things I just wanted to add in addition to that is very simply, there have been moments where the government and politicians have created roundtables or briefings or opportunities for activists to share their stories. But at some point, I think when recommendations and activists give recommendations and share from their very painful lived experiences, when action can't be taken, it does start to raise the question of why do you need somebody to continually give recommendations but not to implement many of those crucial ones? And how can activists not be put in a position where they may be felt as rhetoric to build a certain case for a certain agenda, a political agenda? So I think really being able to get those recommendations to the finish line, I understand not everyone may be possible, but I think that there are many, especially when it comes to transnational repression, that activists from fighting against authoritarian regimes around the world have been echoing for several years now, including about different mechanisms that the government can introduce, or even just a basic legal framework in the United States on transnational repression. And I think the second one, which I wanted to raise, is about the colonial boarding schools inside of Tibet. Because when you have a country like the United States or Canada or Australia that have these histories that are so painful, they truly understand what a genocidal policy like a colonial boarding school can do to fragment a community, to actually wipe a community off the face of this earth indefinitely or completely permanently. Right now, what we're seeing inside Tibet is 80% of all students are being raised by the Chinese government in mandatory boarding school programs. These are children as young as 3 or 4 years old. If you have a child or a niece or a nephew or a cousin who's that age, imagine them waking up in the morning and not remembering what their mother's face looks like. or waking up one day and realizing their dream was in Chinese last night because they remember Chinese better than their own mother tongue. That's the generation that's being raised by the Chinese government under these policies right now. So although countries like the United States and others have made statements here and there about this issue, I think that really every government, and especially the United States, Canada, and Australia, have the utmost responsibility to do everything in their power to speak out against these colonial boarding schools, whether it's sanctions, whether it's bilateral meetings or public statements at the United Nations. Like, there is no excuse because we already have seen what a fragmenting effect, what a genocidal policy like this can do to an entire nation of people. And so that's something which I think every government, but especially the United States government, has the utmost responsibility to take severe action on immediately.
I have so many things to say about this. I think another very important thing that I would also love to raise is about, the importance of the United States government standing its ground and taking concrete actions on human rights. For the past few years, the Hong Kong community have been urging the British government, the Canadian government to impose sanctions on Hong Kong and Chinese officials who have violated human rights in Hong Kong. But every time when we talk to these politicians, they say we want to see what the U.S. government is doing. I understand that, some of us may see, the U.S. sometimes its very aggressive role on the international arena as an act of imperialism, but I do think that given the United States economic